So I know you've probably all heard about it before, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of the opportunities and challenges of Open RAN, because actually these have an impact, I believe, on policy. So let's have a look at what are the opportunities. So a diversified ecosystem. Today, three vendors have approximately 80% of the global RAN equipment market. And this is a challenge for the mobile industry, as increasingly geopolitical pressures limits the supplies that mobile operators can deal with. The modularity of open and virtualized RAN will enable established RAN vendors to diversify for new companies to emerge and supply RAN hardware and software. So second opportunity is better resource utilization and cost savings. Sorry, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat this morning. Operators view open and virtualized RAN as an option for the rollout of new networks, particularly 5G, and are looking to reduce the cost of network components, and open and virtualized RAN can help. These savings are seen as likely to come from improved asset utilization and efficiency gains by increased automation of network operations. Faster innovation and reduced vendor lock-in. I think this is a very important one. Open interfaces expand the pool of suppliers from which operators can source both hardware, so I better take a drink of water here, and software components, which can then help them add new features and services quickly without being locked into a single vendor's roadmap. Fourthly, support for customized networks, such as private networks. Based on GSMA's intelligence survey data, around half operators globally offer private 4G solutions. A third of surveyed operators have launched or are testing private 5G wireless networks, while a majority are planning to launch in the next 3 years. These deployments are likely to require specific combinations of network functionality, performance, and attributes, and cost profiles that may be more easily supported with the use of open and virtualized RAN infrastructure, while also avoiding being locked in to proprietary solutions. But as always, and we know there are challenges, and security and reliability of networks is often seen as, one of the top ones. So open and virtualized RAN disaggregates the network components, and this potentially, and I'm always stressing the word, broadens the number. Well, it does actually broaden the number of threat services for any network. On the other hand, these shifts present mobile operators with the greatest set of options to procure and configure best-in-class, secure, reliable, and resilient networks, while adhering to national procurement restrictions and facilitating alignment with best practice security principles. This is in addition to the inherent improvements in security provisions, mechanisms, and architecture of the 5G specifications. A little later on, I'll talk about what has been done in this security area. So industry readiness, again, I think this is a very important one. Although the majority of operators consider it's important to deploy open networking technologies, they're often held by internal expertise gaps. This means they need to retrain existing staff or transition to skill sets. Cost effectiveness. We said that the promise of cost savings in operations and control from open and virtualized RAN are really yet to be realized. This is an implicit assumption. There is an implicit assumption that deploying open and virtualized RAN architecture will bring substantial cost savings. However, this ignores the operational complexity. For example, training to manage multiple vendor solutions. Systems integration is also a major concern for operators when they're thinking about deploying Open RAN. I mean, if you think about it, if the current big network vendors, they do a fantastic job. The operators work with often more than one vendor to make sure they've got security and some sort of difference in their network. But the vendors there provide more or less a turnkey solution. So there's not as much for the operators to do. Obviously, they've got to be, work with the vendors, but with an Open RAN, there's a lot more integration, working with different solutions. How do you put this all together? So that's why, some of where we thought the cost considerations would be, come to fruition, have perhaps not actually done so in reality. So if I can draw your attention to the to the right-hand side of this slide. Sorry, it's a little bit small. I hope you can see it. So, Open RAN rollouts are not yet widespread. And this chart provides the commitments and commercial deployments of Open RAN as of today, actually, as of March 2024. And you can see that, there are quite a few deployments, but it's not as much as, when you think about how many countries have actually got Open RAN. So we've got 100 operators from 52 countries have active Open RAN trials and deployments. So if you can see on the chart there, the commercial deployments are relatively small. But there are some in each country, as you can see in Asia Pacific. We've got 6 there, and we've got a number of commitments and trials. Now, if I can divert your attention to the left-hand side, just because we haven't got that many at the moment, the aspirations are actually about being open and automated. So what I've got on this slide is here on the every year, the GSMA does a survey of over 100 network operators, and it's with their procurement people and their strategy people, and ask them a ton load of questions. And I've just picked this one out here. So how important are the following technology priorities as part of your current network transformation strategy? And if you can see there, the very top one is open network technologies, which includes Open RAN. So 79% of them see this as being very or extremely important. So although we might not have much today, the future, is certainly looking for open. So now if I just look at the policy enablers, what I wanted to do is that to mention here is that mobile operators, mobile infrastructure is a competitive differentiator, and each operator will make its own network design and configuration choices to align with different business strategies. But policy, so I'm saying, in the other slide there, we see that there is an intention to go to Open RAN, and policy has a role in the evolution and creating an enabling environment to support the deployment of Open RAN infrastructure. So let me share with you what policymakers can do to support the deployment of Open RAN, and provide you with some examples where these measures have been implemented. And a little later on, I think Grace and Richard, we may talk a little bit in a Q&A session about more along different countries. So R&D investments. So policymakers can support R&D investments in open and virtualized RAN. For example, through R&D tax credits or funding of pilot deployment projects, test beds and interoperability initiatives, while allowing the market to choose the best mixes of technology. And I really stress that the market must choose the best mix of technologies. For example, the European Commission is supporting work in this area with the Affordable 5G project, with the changes in the telecommunications equipment supply chain and the design of network infrastructure. Policymakers are also thinking about how to diversify the equipment supply, as well as local assembly, which could support open interfaces and virtualization. This can be seen in several countries in Asia Pacific, for example, in India's production-linked investment PLI scheme to encourage investment into domestic manufacturers of goods in India. The scope of PLI for telecommunications was amended to include Open RAN. We've seen that R&D investments are also very much the case in Japan, Korea. We've seen it again in UK. So interoperability initiatives. The success of open and virtualized RAN deployments will be built on the assurances that a radio module from one vendor will work seamlessly with a complementary hardware module of software application for another vendor. Even where open interfaces are specified, considerable efforts and collaboration is required for testing. But formal recognition of RAN specifications such as 3GP and O-RAN Alliance, as well as support for interface certification systems, integration schemes to enable the mix and match of different RAN components will help the acceleration and integration of RAN infrastructure elements. Policymakers' support for interoperability testing laboratories and certification schemes will help accelerate the RAN ecosystem. In August 2022, the approval of the European standardization body of ETSI, giving Open RAN specification its seal of approval, is a good step forward. So security assurance and certification, as I alluded to before, security in Open RAN is seen as potential issues. So it's also key that we ensure we can strengthen the network security. The GSMA welcomes the commitment and focus of policymakers on these issues through assurances and certification schemes, such as the European Commission focus and support of 5G certification schemes. To further strengthen resilience and engender trust in the security of the 5G ecosystem, we encourage all suppliers and components for RAN, particularly in schemes such as the GSMA's Network Equipment Security Scheme, NESIS, and appropriate certification schemes such as those proposed under the framework of the Cybersecurity Act in the EU. So NESIS is a scheme that GSMA has to certify equipment vendors. And so, the traditional network vendors have their equipment. And now we have seen Mavenir, which is an Open RAN solution provider. They have had their test equipment by NESIS, and it's NESIS compliant. So this is what we're seeing now, is that it's not just the traditional telco vendors that are having their equipment through our system, they're being NESIS compliant. We're seeing this with Open RAN. So support of Open RAN trials and deployment. If policymakers can fund trials of Open RAN networks by network operators and the wider mobile ecosystem and academia. For example, in the UK, government has committed 250 million Open RAN network R&D fund to accelerate the development and deployment of open interfaces, architectures such as Open RAN. This has resulted in mobile network operators, developers and suppliers in taking proactive steps to support Open RAN trials and commitments to deployments in their commercial network. Regulatory modernization, I think Grace did an excellent job talking about some of the things that needed to, modernization of, in many countries, the frameworks. Well, some need more modernization than others. I mean, and all regulatory frameworks and policymakers are working tirelessly to do this. And it's quite a struggle for them, to keep up to date with the changes. But policymakers can take proactive steps to update regulations and licensing requirements to support the adoption of Open RAN, while maintaining the integrity of the mobile network and safeguarding users' privacy and security. This may include revising technical requirements, streamlining approval processes, and addressing potential concerns around network resilience and security. India is a good example where the government has taken positive steps to modernize the regulatory framework, enable the mobile operators to roll out 5G. Now, I know one thing I would like to highlight, and I'm sure you've probably seen this and maybe you've seen this before, but the Open RAN Policy Coalition has developed an Open RAN policy roadmap, and I'd encourage you to really have a look at that. That's available on their website, and I don't know if organisers we can put that link in the if you've already seen it. I'd encourage you to have a look at that, because it really is a great way to see a nice roadmap. It gives some excellent examples of what governments can do, and these are examples. You can't what works in one country won't necessarily work in another country. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that as well. So policymakers can also develop programs to train. Sorry, let me go on. Sorry, I've lost my point here a bit. Where have I gone? Sorry, let me move on to, just bear with me. So encourage collaboration and international collaboration. So working with other countries and international organizations to promote global adoption of Open RAN, share best practices and develop joint initiatives to address common challenges. I think here in the Philippines is an excellent example of international collaboration, with the US, with the Open RAN Interoperability Lab. And India and the United States have launched public-private joint task forces and development of Open RAN systems. So we're seeing India's Bharat 6G and the US Next Generation Alliance will co-lead this public-private research with financing from the US. International Development Finance Cooperation and partnership with USAID, India and the United States are also teaming up to launch Open RAN deployments in both countries to demonstrate the scalability of its technology to advance its competitiveness in international markets. And, seeing, for examples, the more collaboration we can do, the better. And, actually, I was, seeing some of the people, well, I'm not seeing, but looking at the people who are participating on this course today. I know that we've got participants from many different countries. The more we can collaborate, the more we can share, the more we can do to work together. I think that is, very, very important. So the final one I'd like to just talk about is capacity building. So policymakers, well, before we can talk about, let's talk about policymakers and their capacity building. I think Grace alluded to it before. It's very demanding for policymakers to keep up to speed with all the changes. They're constantly running to keep ahead. And I think, one of the things we need to do is also capacity building for our policymakers. And this is something that GSMA actually does. We have a range of capacity building programs on many, many topics. But one of them is actually on the development of RAN, Open RAN. We're actually running that program. These capacity building courses are for policymakers only. They're free of charge. And we're actually having an in-person event on this Open RAN and the development of RAN and going up to 6G. It's actually happening next week, actually in Pakistan. And so clearly that's mainly South Asian policymakers who are joining that. But that's an in-person capacity building program. But that is available to policymakers online at various times, and I can make the details of those courses to Aurora so that they can ensure that policymakers who are there collaborating with can see where those courses are, because they run at various times. And I say they're free of charge and they are online as well. But so that's about how do we skill the policymakers, but what can policymakers do to train and upskill the workforce in Open RAN technologies to ensure there's a sufficient pool of skilled professionals to support the growth of the industry. The TIP Indonesia program, and obviously here in Aurora, is an excellent example of government, industry, academia and industry associations working to accelerate the development and deployment of Open RAN initiatives. So what I wanted to do here is, I know this is, well, is this really policy? But I wanted to look a little bit about the evolution path of Open RAN, well, where we are on 5G and Open RAN, because that again, I think has impact for policymakers. So you can see here, I've got a 6G timeline. Now, I really don't like to be talking about 6G when we've really only just started about 5G. But what this slide is trying to demonstrate to you that, as you can see here, every more or less 10 years, there's a new deployment of, of technology. So, back in 1980, we had 1G, then in 1990, 2G, and then we've got 3G. And where we are today in 2020, we've got 5G. 5G has been launched, and there are different releases of 5G. And I think that's an important point. Again, I'd like to emphasize to people on this course that 5G is not just one release. It comes out in various releases. This chart doesn't really show that well, unfortunately. I couldn't find one that had the various releases. So we're currently at release 17. And you may think everything that's, you hear about 5G is available. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Some of the features and functionality will appear in different releases. And so release 18, which will come out this year, it will be released this year and be commercially available next year, has some features that allow more things to be done with 5G. And also why this is important is that some of the, Open RAN is also part of that. So some of that functionality is actually being brought in to these new releases. So if we can go on to, and why I'm saying this is important because I see Open RAN as being very important to 6G. So can we go to the next slide, please? So I just want to talk a little bit about how 6G will shape the evolution of the RAN and the relevant Open RAN features. So if we see today, so traditional KPIs is throughput, latency, capacity. As with previous generations, the 6G RAN is expected to improve basic performance metrics. This will be possible thanks to advancements in R&D, increased computational power and new spectrum. So why is this relevant to Open RAN features? Well, modular physical layers within interchangeable components. So Open Fronthaul will add flexibility for deployment. Energy efficiency, this is really being built in. It's high on the 5G agenda, and it's really being built into 6G. And what we're seeing again with Open RAN, use of AI, cloud and virtualization, real-time RIC, this is actually being a feature to, be more energy efficiency. So this is really, again, good news for Open RAN. Flexible coverage. Let me just move on to, a ubiquitous coverage will remain a goal, but for 6G, what will be more important is having a RAN that can deliver the performance required based on geographical location and use cases. And again, this is something that I think that's, again, relevant for Open RAN features, different tiering of products, massive MIMO, virtualization, different physical layers, versatility. Depending on the use case, the RAN may trade latency for reliability, capacity for maximum speed, uplink, downlink, etc. So again, Open RAN, near real-time RIC, programmability, cloud and virtualization. These are all good things, they're all relevant in Open RAN features. So what will the ecosystem may look like? And I remember this is May, and so this is not necessarily, this is a view. It may not look like that, but let's see what it could be. What would we like it to be? So key features of Open RAN added to 3GPP, specifications of 6G RAN. All traditional vendors to offer Open RAN compliant 6G products. Several new RAN vendors offer specialized solutions, private networks, indoor large venues, etc. 6G RAN witnesses the diversification of vendor ecosystems. Remember what I said at the start of this talk, 80% of RAN is by 80% of RAN is for 3 vendors today. 6G leads to the end of a split between traditional and new RAN vendors. So the evolution of the RAN towards Open RAN is inevitable. In fact, the expectation is that the future RAN will gradually embed all the advantages of Open RAN. There will be no longer a distinction between Open RAN and RAN.